Cloak and Swagger Rogue Podcast. My name is Brandon, aka Ulrich from Emerald Dream. Joining me once more is Tragedy. Tragedy, take it away.
Hey everyone, my name's Shane, or Tragedy, as you guys can call me here in game. I've been roguing it up since 2004, and just here to provide my insight on this game.
Awesome. He has a lot more experience playing a rogue than I ever will, so we bring him along. So today's topic, I had posted a question of the day to Reddit, as well as to BattleNet. Didn't really get as many responses as I thought, but I kind of think the whole self-promotion that I've been doing over the past couple of days on Reddit kind of caused that. So that's neither here nor there. Show must go on. So today we're going to be talking about lore, and on top of lore, we're going to be talking about important rogues, be them NPCs or players. Now, one thing that both Tragedy and myself have noticed is that rogues, from a lore standpoint, are a very, very underrepresented class.
That's correct.
Yeah, some of the more famous ones coming to mind, and feel free to chime in if you can think of any others. We've got, Garona, half Orcan, who obviously has a bit of a spotlight now, what with being in the Warlords of Draenor. We've got Valeria Sanguinar, who I guess if you're more interested in Hearthstone, you know her as the character for the Rogue deck. And then you've got the Van Cleefs, I guess you could consider more so the daughter. I mean, I guess Edwin Van Cleef, if he were like a spec, would probably be, Combat Rogue?
He definitely fits the swashbuckler theme of combat more than anything else.
Yeah. So that's really it. I mean, there aren't really any other.
Yeah, that's it. That's as far as it goes in terms of like straight up rogues. We don't really have big representatives lore-wise. There are a couple that I guess are referred to as rogue-ish, like Maeve, Illidan's Jailer, but nothing that's just like a straight-out rogue. Just Garona, Sanguinar, and the Van Cleefs, which we no longer have.
Right. And I guess we have, factions. That was the one thing we actually kind of touched on a little bit in the last episode when we had Darko with us, and we kind of talked about how every class has their own kind of like mini faction, and it'd be really neat if, much like the Death Knights do with the Knights of the Ebon Blade, if each class could kind of work with their respected class faction, so to speak. Because we have SI7 on the Alliance, and then obviously those of you playing on the Horde have the Deathstalkers. More or less the same thing. They're just spy masters and everything like that. But, just something to kind of give the players a little bit more, keep them, I guess, more in touch with the game world, or more in touch with the lore, which, I mean, some people don't really play for the lore, so I guess I can kind of see that argument going both ways. But, when Death Knights came out and they're like, oh, it's going to be a hero class, and, you're kind of entwined in these Knights of the Ebon Blade, I just was kind of like, wow, that'd be neat, like, you got your Druids, and, Druids of the Talon, and Druids of the Claw, and all these different, like, little sub-factions within the kind of, the boundaries of that spec, and it's kind of neat.
It is, and it's funny because it's not that we don't have the potential or sort of the avenues to explore rogue lore. It's just we in the game haven't. Right. The furthest that we've gone, I mean, we have a couple things with SI7 and with Deathstalkers as questing, which even then, they're not explicitly roguish. SI7 just has anyone that can sneak around, and Deathstalkers are sort of the same thing.
Right.
And then with rogues, the deepest we really got into a rogue thing was Ravenhold with the daggers. I'm not quite sure you remember doing the quest line.
Right.
But yeah, you can see the potential there. You can see how much we can expand into, but we really don't, which is a shame. Because, people have these, and we're talking about the number of lore-rich characters. A shaman can tell you about Thrall, in going into Death Knights and Paladins and everyone else. Everyone has something, may just have Jaina or Khadgar. There's a lot of big characters or lore-rich characters that classes can go to and kind of fantasize about. But rogues, we have Garona, which was really only explored this expansion, and that's it. We've never gone into like Sanguinar. We've never gone into the other, or even had other lore-rich characters to work off of.
Yeah,
And
and
it's sort of
now
a shame because
go ahead.
I was gonna say it's sort of a shame because I think that yeah, some people may not play for lore, but it's sort of still nice to have a representative in the game that you're playing that you can kind
Absolutely.
of something to come to mind.
Right, right. Now, one thing I do want to touch on too, because now that I'm thinking about it, with Valyria and Garona being the big two, a lot of the I guess extended universe stuff for Warcraft, like the comic books and things like that, they do focus on them. I want to say that Valyria was in one of the comic series. The name it's lost on me, but it's the comic series where Varian Rin is like the pit fighter. It's the before he gets freed and comes back to Stormwind and everything like that, which is like classic slash vanilla.
Yeah,
But they talk about that, and then I want to say they talk about Garona a little bit more. But yeah, I mean, you really just don't see much. I guess. I mean, like I said, Garona is probably the biggest name that we see in game as far as a representative, or like a like a big legendary like hero kind of deal. And I mean, this is again purely going off of just how they're labeled. Even a lot of these characters again, like Garona, like Valyria, and everything like that, who have been in the game are in the game files and stuff. They're considered rogues and so on and so forth. But obviously, clearly they are assassins. And then again, we've got SI7, which in the questing and everything like that, I want to say that it used to be in if you played a dwarf, there was a quest chain you could do. Well, I guess anybody could do it, but if you played the Alliance, there's a quest chain you could do in the shady part of Ironforge that technically, like, if you read through the quest text and everything like that, they send you to SI7 and Old Town, and you quote unquote become a member, which that's kind of becoming a member, air quotes again, in the same sense that paladins are part of the we're part of the Order of the Silver Hand, which is
right.
now the whole Argent Crusade kind of thing. They're a part of it because reasons. So
Yeah,
it's something a
and it
little
sort
more
of leaves us.
tangible.
Yeah, and it sort of leaves us without an identity, doesn't it, when we're kind of dealing with this sort of situation.
Mm-hmm. I mean, even the Defias Brotherhood, who's they're arguably next to what the Syndicate, the probably the best known rogue group or like clandestine group, I
Right.
guess. And they're kind of assholes, I guess. Well, it really depends on your take on that whole situation, but they're
Yeah,
the bad guys.
we've explored their line or their
Mhm.
history in the game, and I think that's what we should really focus on is what we experience in the game.
Right.
We've explored them as much as the Syndicate. We've explored the Syndicate really as much as SI7 or Deathstalkers, which
Right.
I see that as a problem.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And I mean, especially now when you've reached a point with Warcraft where there's a lot of people that weren't really happy with Warlords of Draenor because it's we're gonna just rehash Burning Crusade. We're gonna change it. It's gonna be different, but that whole thing. I feel like they miss a lot of opportunities with lore. And I actually jokingly with a lot of the people in my guild, we often like to tease and poke fun at the story writing staff for Warcraft because you get a lot of stuff that just kind of trails off and it just ends, or you get a lot of stuff that like you'll get quests and things like that allude to something else going on or another quest or something like that, and then that expansion's over with and it doesn't go anywhere, or
Right. It sort of feels like when you're watching a show that you really like, and it gets canceled,
Mhm.
during its run before the writers could wrap stories up.
Right.
Except it feels all the time, they get these ideas they get really excited about, and they can't close them, and so, which is in some cases okay for them because they can bring them back later and wrap them up in that way. But we get left with a lot of unanswered questions for things that just go unmentioned at all.
Right.
We don't even worry about it or think about them after that.
Right. Yeah, and you're absolutely right. I mean, one good thing, or well, one good way to look at it when you're talking about lore and stuff like that just kind of gets brushed to the side. If you remember from the Cataclysm days, the Abyssal Maw, which was that proposed underwater raid that they wanted to do out in Vashj'ir.
Right, the one that was going to be alongside Firelens, is that right?
Right. Yeah, that was the one, and then they scrapped it. If I remember, the official reason for scrapping it was something along the lines of players have a hard enough time navigating the raids with the dimensions they're given, and they wanted to have like this really awesome underwater thing, and you were gonna swim around and fight bosses, and it just never really went anywhere. But there was a whole lot of lore and stuff like that would have gone with it, because I don't know that they ever really wrapped it up. It's been a long time since I've done Vashj'ir. But with Throne of the Tides, they take Neptulon, one of these big important elemental dudes, and then that's that. As far as I know, dude's still MIA. Like, I don't think.
Yeah,
I want to say
I actually looked him up specifically not too long ago, and they sort of just left. I want to say in one of the books they just kind of mentioned, oh, he got out of whatever's grasp, which I was like, that sort of really leaves a sour taste in my mouth, because
Right.
you want to know more. You want to you kind of go through this quest line, this dungeon, and it just kind of wraps up off screen. And I think that's one of the things that bothers me, is there should be some at least hint to things like that in game.
Right.
Because off-screening stuff just doesn't sit well with me with lore.
Yeah, and that's. I guess in some ways, I get it. I remember reading The Shattering prior to Cataclysm coming out, and going into Cataclysm, I was like, oh, this is going to be really cool. Like, you got all this stuff, but at the same time, I feel when you have to start bridging into other media to explain your story, and there was a big thing. I didn't actually read the book that had the trial of Hellscream and everything like that, but at the same time, there was that whole big like, wait, how did Garrosh get out of jail? Like, he was supposed to be going to trial in Pandaria. How are the pandas that bad at handling prisoners? Like, a lot of questions come to mind, and then they're just like, oh, we summed all that stuff up in this book. And there's all this intrigue going on, and there's a lot of stuff that would have made for really interesting quest lines and really interesting, cutscenes and things like that to fill in a lot of gaps that we have going from these expansions, but it just kind of got delegated to bookwork.
Yeah, and I mean that happens in a few other different medias as well. I remember when I was a kid, that would happen with comic books.
Right.
Specifically Batman was one of them, where you would get this main storyline, and then you would have moments where you'd go, well, what happened to this guy? What happened to this character? And you'd find out, oh, well, there's another series in the same universe that explains it, but it's not mentioned here again.
Right.
So that's always a little irritating, because you want to know more about it. And I feel I've played a lot of other classes, and I love the World of Warcraft lore. Mm-hmm. And I think what really with rogues is we just don't get explored, and it doesn't make me feel close to the lore, and I think that would kind of enrich my experience playing a rogue.
Yeah.
But the question I guess I gotta ask is, at what point in the storyline that we know that's going to happen, such as the South Seas, or dealing with the Emerald Dream, at what point do you think? Because I think the South Seas would be a really great introduction to work more with lore, with a rogue lore. Uh-huh. But I'm kind of curious as to what you think that would come in, or what a good point would be to start exploring rogue lore, or maybe class lore in general.
I think, honestly, if they were to do a Seas of Kultiris kind of expansion, that would be amazing. And one reason I say that too is, they're dropping the shipyard, and I just want to go on the record and say I'm very upset that I don't get to be a scurvy pirate. It's very, very disheartened when I found out that you're just basically sending the ships on missions, and I get to stare at them instead of sailing them around and ruining other people's day. But on that same vein, doing something like that when you were to bring that in, because then you've got like the Bloodsail faction, the pirates from Stranglethorn.
The Bloodsail Buccaneers.
Yeah, and then you've got everybody in like Booty Bay and everything like that. So you've got like the really cool pirates that you could work into there, which would technically go along with it, and then that would be a really good opening spot for a decent amount of lore, in my opinion. I think that would open them up to a lot of neat stuff, and that would kind of give us something a little more interesting too, considering what with Cataclysm, when what was that isle called? I can't even think of the name of it. Tolbarad. just kind of
Oh,
washed
right,
up.
right.
Yeah, Tulbarad just kind of washed up on our shore, and they're like, "Oh, by the way, Tulbarad is part of the Kultiris islands." And like, "Oh, cool. You don't think that they would want to know what happened to that island that has a big prison on it?"
Yeah. And
You
that was
know,
sort of shoehorned in, like you said. It was just sort of
yeah,
like, oh, by the way, it's part of the Kultiris.
right,
It's just
right,
that set of islands. So there you go.
right. Yeah, so I mean, I think that would be really interesting. I mean, Emerald Dream obviously would be something they would tend to focus more on druids, what with the whole, being the Emerald Dream and everything like
Right.
that. And that's another thing too, actually, that I saw on Reddit of all places. Somebody had screen capped a little quest thing that talks about how I guess druids within the game lore, all of them learn to manipulate at some point in time the Emerald Dream. Um, so if that becomes a thing, and you're able to kind of manipulate the Emerald Dream and work around with that and do cool stuff like that, that would be neat. That would be really cool for them. But on that same token, doing something like a Kultiris kind of thing could be neat, especially if they portrayed Kultiris out to kind of be almost like that. I'm trying to think of the name of the Goblin City, but I've never played a Goblin, so I don't know. The Goblin City, the Kazan, where it's kind of like a seedy port town kind of thing, especially since the Kultiris nation is known for sailing, and they got Jaina's dad, who was that admiral, and everything like that. That'd be really neat, just kind of a pirate themed expansion. So
Right, and that actually touches up on something that I kind of wanted to bring up as an interesting idea.
yeah,
That starting zone. I think if we ever do another button bloat situation where we get rid of a lot of abilities or we introduce a lot of abilities, I think it would be kind of interesting if Blizzard did that, where part of the leveling experience for that next expansion was going through one or two levels where you're just doing class specific quest to kind of learn more about the abilities that you're getting.
Sure.
Sort of like those intro quests. I think that might be a really good way to introduce some lore, just for everyone in general. Say, hey, before you go out into this new continent, here's your Paladin Mastery, here's your Death Knight Mastery, here's your Rogue Master. Go do your little quest line, and then you'll go back onto the main track for leveling. That would be kind of interesting. I think that it's really hard to say, because I would love more for rogues, but the other classes I'm sure would like some stuff too. So I think that would be a good way to do both at the same time, or do all the classes at the same time, and still have an experience that people felt happy about.
Yeah, absolutely. And one thing too to bring up now that I'm thinking about it is, some classes, namely I know Warrior and Rogue because I've played them recently anyway. If you you go to Old Town, there are some trainers rather, in Old Town that you can actually do class-specific quests that give you. I want to say at a low level, they give you a helmet, which is a reskin of an old Tier 1 helmet, and then you get a dagger as a rogue, or a like a one-handed weapon or a two-handed weapon as a warrior. And they're class specific. And then I remember let's see, what was it? The Berserker stance for warriors. You used to have back in the day. You used to have those quests that you would do specifically for your class, where it's like, oh,
Right.
you do this long quest chain, and then you got Berserker stance, and you got I want to say you got some sort of the Whirlwind axe. I want to say it was for the warrior.
And then there's a Shaman Totem quest,
And then Warlocks had their pet quest and, all that stuff. Something like that. Like, having something like that again, I think would be really nice. And it just would kind of help get players engaged. Like, especially the players that, that they kind of form that bond. Like, they like their character, or they kind of project themselves onto that character. And it's, especially playing on, like, role-playing realms and stuff like that. It just would be something interesting to think about to, to give people something to do.
Yeah, and wasn't it last week that you, me, and Darko were actually mentioning this? I'm not quite sure we said it on the show, but we mentioned that as a player, you kind of get into this rut where, let's say melee, when you're a melee player, you can go to another class and it still feels like a melee. It doesn't feel like you're really switching to
Right.
another class in terms of the way it feels. I can go to a monk and I just go, this is my filler, this is my CD, this
Right,
is my finisher.
You can kind of quantify it down, like you can kind of boil it down, as it were, into just a very, very basic. Yeah. I don't think
So, yeah,
we
that
mentioned it
definitely
on the
helped us a
show,
little
but
bit.
yeah.
Yeah, I think that would help kind of alleviate that problem, because I noticed that if I go play my warrior, which I'm leveling, or my enhancement shaman, my red paladin, it's sort of like I said, you can just boil it down to this is just that set of abilities, and this is how I perform them.
Mhm.
Um, so yeah, that'd be a really great idea, actually.
Yeah, and a lot of that too. In all honesty, I think a lot of that, when you kind of boil it down, it really just it goes in part one with kind of how they've pushed the game design towards a more. In some respects, I think their master plan is to make an easy to pick up, hard to master um, mindset to it. Especially like I had mentioned right before we started the show. Now because I had gotten all this best in slot gear and everything like that, but it's for subtlety rogue. I'm learning to play subtlety rogue in a PVE environment, and it's kind of a totally different thing. It's a lot of micromanaging. It's a different kind of ball game, and I can see why a lot of people will go, myself included, and will fall back on combat, because combat is a very, very simple thing to pick up, and there's not really much to it. It's a pretty streamlined spec, in my opinion. Still has some kinks, but that's a topic for a different day. But you can pick it up, you can do it, you can do steady damage and everything like that, and then you switch over to something like subtlety, which is by no means a superior spec. If you look at straight numbers right now, then yeah, it would be, but it's a slightly more complicated thing. And a lot of classes you have that, I can pick this up, and this is simple. I can just do this, I can just do that, and you can kind of scoot by with it. But yeah, I mean, kind of getting back on the original topic, you do kind of get in that rut where, you know what, I'm going to play this alt, and you're just kind of like, this is no different than my warrior's no different than my death knight, or my my monk is no different than my shaman, kind of thing. You just kind of get in that mindset.
Yeah.
So
So we definitely need something to kind of tie us closer into our classes and bring us closer to the way we feel about our classes and see them.
right. Now, one other thing I wanted to touch on today too, we kind of ran off the deep end with the lore, which is great because I really, I'd like to focus a lot more on doing lore, and who knows, maybe we'll start kind of doing shows dedicated to specific characters or quest lines, or just lore and stuff like that as we move along. But one thing I definitely wanted to touch on is actually rogue players, because that was one of the stipulations of the question that I had asked. Is who do you think are really important players, really important PVE players, and everything like that. And on the topic of PvP players, that was something that we had discussed previously, and you're kind of at the point now where a lot of those guys are kind of dropping off the radar. Like
Yeah, it sort of echoes the issue that we're having with the lore characters.
mhm.
There's not a lot of big names. There have been big names, obviously, but they're just not around anymore. And a lot of them have fallen off. A lot of them aren't playing rogues or aren't playing WoW in general.
Mhm.
So in terms of a real life or real world representative, we don't really have those anymore, do we? Even with theory crafting, it sort of seems to go with whoever wants to pick up the buck for that week
Right.
as to being the bigger theory crafter. And we
Right.
have a couple people here and there, like Fiery Demise does a pretty decent blog,
Mhm.
and some people over at Ravenholt.
Oh yeah, Ravenholt's really
You
good.
know,
Yeah. Yeah, and I
yeah.
mean, on the topic of PvP, a couple that come to mind are like Rekful, who, I mean, honestly, Rekful was a great rogue, Ha-
Oh yeah.
hands down one of my favorite rogues. But that dude was just great at everything. I mean, he was a good warrior. He played a lot of other things. Just he was really good. He was just a
Yeah,
really
he
good
was an
player.
amazing player, and I still see him as a rogue because that's what
Right. He
that
got
was my
big
first
at.
impression of him. Yeah, that was
Uh-huh.
his big thing.
Um, and then you've got like Wound Man, who actually Wound Man is what, ironically enough, kind of inspired me to keep playing combat. When I first had picked up combat, a couple of what was it? I dabbled in it during Cataclysm, played it to max level in Mist of Pandaria, but there was one point in time there where Wound Man was consistently 2v1ing people, and yeah, I was kind of in like Rat League 2s and things like that, but it was just kind of impressive still just to see this guy kind of run in and still fight two people at once like it was nothing. And he's actually has a couple of really good videos where he does stuff like that. But he was a really good rogue. There's RZN. There, or is it RZ? Yeah, it's RZN. Sorry, I was gonna say, for some reason
Yeah.
I thought AZN. Like right now we've got Naj, who's a really great player, and Generics. Generics actually also writes for Skill Capped, and then TSM Peekaboo, which he and honestly has been one of my favorites. I know he's kind of fallen off recently, but he is a very young kid. But they were calling this kid the prodigy. I mean, kid was pushing like 3K rating there for the longest time, right out the gate for for Warlords of Draenor, and was just doing amazing work. So, I mean, we've got a couple of people, but as with every expansion, this expansion ruined PvP, and last expansion, that expansion ruined PvP, and then the expansion before that, that expansion ruined PvP, and going, so
Did
on.
you see that image? That
right.
was just like every expansion was making it worse than the
was
road
making,
before.
Yeah, and you know what? That's a heated topic for debate, because honestly, with something like that, that's a very opinionated matter. And
I think in general for PvP, it's just really hard to just bring it down to balance, because you have people that wanted balance as 1v1. You want people that wanted balance around battlegrounds or balance around arenas, and then you have people that want balance around specific sort of arena groups or arena teams, and now RBGs. Like it's such a hard thing to just bring into it. I mean, look at PvE.
Right.
We took things from being able to do 10 and 25 man to just saying, screw it, you guys are going to do 20 as a high end.
Right.
Just
and
so that we can keep you guys balanced.
Yeah. Right.
So, I mean, with PvP, I think it makes it that much harder, which is really sad because, like you mentioned, they're just faces and names that are dropping off now.
Yeah, and I mean, even going back, I mean, we could probably do an entire show dedicated to, classic PvP videos, which, that maybe we will. But same thing. That's the state of Warcraft as it is. I mean, a lot of these people too. You gotta consider game's been out for 10 years. I only know a handful of people that have been at it that entire 10 years. One of which is a good friend of mine named Matt. Matt, if you're watching, shout out to you for being awesome. But even some of these older players or more experienced players are getting to the point where they're just kind of like, yep, this is really kind of lame. And I think that's going to be the linchpin for Blizzard, is going to be trying to do something to reinvigorate older players or their older player base to come back. Because, I mean, let's face it, when Warcraft spikes, like with Warlords of Draenor, when they spike back up to 10 million and they're like, oh, fuck yes, it's happening, it's not, that's not 3 million new players. Now, there's going to be new players in there, but a lot of that is going to be people that have played, they're tried and true Warcraft players, and, they're coming back, which...
Yeah.
Surprise, surprise, when they dropped that 3 million, didn't really surprise me, I guess.
Not at all, especially because there was a lot of hype around WoD, which I think at the time was justified from the player base for us to be hyped. And you mentioned the people that have been playing for 10 years. I've been doing that, and the first friend I actually made in game is still playing World of Warcraft.
Nice.
But he's taken quite a few breaks. But
right.
When WoD came back, all of our old friends that we raided with back in Vanilla and into BC, they came back, and they were around for a month or two, and then they just stopped signing on.
Right.
That's just going to happen, and unfortunately, that's just a demographic that I think is going to be harder for Blizzard to reach than for them to reach new players, honestly. They'll get them back for a little bit, but they're not really going to keep them, and that's just, I'm sure you have those friends that go, I'm going to come back for this expansion, I'll come back for this patch, and then that they just experience the patch for a week or two, and then they go, okay, I know what's going on, and they're done.
Like I've seen everything I need to see. Yeah, and I mean, with they've talked about speeding up the patch development and speeding up the expansion delivery and everything like that. That's something that they need to focus more on quality as opposed to quantity, because what's going to happen is they're going to start putting out these patches rapid fire. And we're going to be getting, we're going to get a new raid, or, after that, who knows what we're going to get. I would assume, more likely than not, calling it right now, put your tinfoil hats on, they're probably going to announce a new expansion at BlizzCon. We kind of talked about this, but I could see them coming up to the point where they release a patch, like they'll release, we'll say 6.3, and then BlizzCon comes out and they'll be like, oh my god, we've got the new expansion, guys, everybody lose your shit. And then they'll be like, okay, we'll patch 6.4, which is going to come out in fucking, we'll say, I don't know, December or January, something like that. I'm not. We'll just use an arbitrary timeline. 6.4 is going to come out, and that's going to be the pre-expansion event, and you're going to have all this cool stuff, and then the expansion will come out. I would think that that's probably how they're going to go about it, just because I think they're actually going to start realizing, especially after the launch of Warlords and gaining the 3 million, losing them. You're still sitting at a healthy 7 million player base, which is what I think a lot of people forget. 7 million people play this game on a regular basis. Like, that's a lot of people. So
Yeah.
But if they really want to capitalize and they want to go back to that Wrath / I want to say early Cata, where it was like 12 million players and everything like that, and they were just like, look at how many fucking people play Warcraft. Like, we're gonna need something to make those people want to play Warcraft, as opposed to, hey, check it out, we're gonna do this Burning Crusade heroic dungeon set as a raid. Which, Hellfire looks kind of neat, but at the same time, I'm really hoping that the whole Warlords, let's go back in time and rehash, the first expansion. I'm really hoping that doesn't become a theme. So.
Yeah, and I'm really hoping it doesn't either. Just from a lore perspective, time travel is just one of those things I'm not a big fan of when it comes to telling a story, because it becomes so ass backwards and so wonky in terms of getting things straight. I mean, recently there was that whole demon being tied to the Nether thing that just throws so many questions into the loop. So I really hope we don't get, well, here's alternate Northrend. I don't want to do that. As much as I loved Wrath, which is funny because the time I hated Wrath, but in retrospect, as much as I loved Wrath, I don't want to do that. I don't want that to be the experience we get from now on. And you mentioned the quality over quantity. When they can bring out, for example, let's say they bring out a patch that has 20 different features. Right. I know that's an exorbitant amount, but no matter how many things you bring out, there's going to be a group of people that just blast through it as fast as they can, and they've experienced a patch and now they're done. Right. That's what, and you mentioned the quality part, that's what we need, is something goes, yeah, I've done it, but I continue to enjoy doing it regardless of doing it 1 time or 20 times or 40 times. That's sort of what we need more than anything else, something for people to keep logging on and enjoy doing every day.
Yeah, absolutely.
Or once a week or what have you.
And then we can kind of, in summary, we can kind of throw that back to what we were saying before, where if you offer these factions or, these quests, or, hey, let me deck out my, using the garrisons as an example. If you're a Death Knight, you can get Knights of the Ebon Blade stuff. Well, I want SI7 stuff, or I want, Defias Brotherhood, or just using that as an example, or, I want to decorate my stuff like the Deathstalkers, or the Royal Apothecaries, or, all of these different factions that you can, kind of get rep and everything with. And that kind of, playing on that'll give somebody something to do, because it's like, oh, cool, now I can distinguish my garrison, here's what I have to do it, now I have something to do. Now you've created content, you've got a reason for them to want to come back, as long as it doesn't suck ass like the rep grinds did in Pandaria, but again, different show. It just kind of, when you start looking and you start branching out, and if Blizzard would kind of focus on what they have in front of them as opposed to trying to kind of grasp at straws to make up new stuff, I think they could really deliver a lot with existing content. Now, obviously, again, you're going to have those people that are going to blast through everything. They're going to demand, we need 5 new continents, we need spaceships, we need, we need to go to Argus, we need to kick Sargeras in the teeth, kind of thing. But you're always going to have people like that.
Oh yeah, you're not going to keep everyone happy, but you're going to try and keep people around. Exactly. And I think that's what we're really suffering from. Like you said, we have that spike of 10 million people, and then it drops down pretty hardcore after that.
Exactly. Which again, 7 million people, that's nothing to be ashamed of. That is a lot of people. And again, the sky is falling, Warcraft is dying. No, not at all. I've been playing for a long time. And I mean, yeah, some faces have gone, some faces have changed, but there's always going to be, the way I like to think it is, there's always going to be that one person that experiences, what at least I can vividly remember. I don't know, because you've been playing a lot longer than I have. You're always going to have those people that log on and they make their character and they're so excited. It's this whole big new world, and they're just genuinely excited to explore it. And it's just a totally new experience for them, and it's awesome. And I vividly remember that and that feeling, and it's so great. And there are a lot of things that still kind of captivate that, like, oh wow, exploration. There's all this stuff going on, and there's always going to be those people. So there's you will have an influx of new players or returning players and things like that. So I don't think I don't think we've closed the coffin just yet.
Oh no, not at all. There's still a lot that can be done to reinvigorate, I guess, the hearts of the World of Warcraft players.
Yes, absolutely. So, I think we've pretty much covered all the topics that we have for today. I can't really think of anything else that I need to add. In all honesty, I kind of liked where we went with the lore. So, those of you watching, if you liked it, feel free to, leave us some comments. The Facebook channel that I have, or rather the Facebook page I have for the channel, is on my Twitch channel. If you take a look at that, it's facebook.com/raisinbran. Leave me some comments. Tell me what you think. What you want to see. The YouTube page is also on there. This video will be uploaded to that as soon as I get a chance. And again, I look forward to hearing your comments, good, bad, indifferent, things like that. Anything we can do to improve. Anything, you'd like us to cover. I do want to look into kind of doing some more serious rogue-oriented stuff, while maintaining, like we have today, just a kind of a goofy, fun, let's talk about lore, let's talk about this, let's talk about that. Because again, at the end of the day, we're all here watching or listening or what have you, because we all play rogues and we all like to be rogues. So, without further ado, everybody, I'm Bran, and this is my co-host,
The Tragedy.
and this has been Cloak and Swagger, Episode 3. Thank you.